Good morning. How are you out there? I am Semily Bilbrey. I am your biggest fan. I am your biggest encourager, and I am a certified mom mentor inside Mom Mastery University. And I am a mom. I am a wife. I am a teacher. How many titles can we give ourselves? When we think about it, how many titles can we give ourselves that the world gives us? There's one title that's important, and that is, I am a child of God. Nothing else matters compared to that, right? So I am in a hotel because I am on my mud board. For those of you who don't live nearby, we handle the water and wastewater for our neighborhoods. And that sounds super exciting, doesn't it? It is, let me tell you. But anyways, it is our semi-annual conference. So I am in a hotel because the conference wrapped up last night and I am headed home today. So I figured I would get on here before I leave and pop in and do a live because there are some things that have been on my mind for a little while. I don't know about your mind, but sometimes my mind can be a kind of scary place, right? It seems like at the beginning of each year, there are some cycles that happen in my life. And the beginning of each year, one of the things that happens is God does a lot, like towards the end of the previous year and as we start the beginning of the year, God does a lot of refining in my life. And he does a lot of, he brings up a lot of questions in my mind and a lot of just a lot of reflection of, am I going in the right direction? And I don't think that's unique to me. I think a lot of people have that as well. It happens for me again in Lent, by the way. Not all denominations celebrate Lent, but mine does. And Lent for me is a time where God says, okay, now we are right around a quarter of the way through the year. Let's circle back and assess where we are spiritually. So it's a real focus on spiritual during Lent, but it's kind of a focus on everything in January. Sorry, I have an itch. I'm in another town and the air is really dry and my skin does not appreciate that. Okay, so anyways, so here's what's on my mind. I'm going to talk to you about 3 keys to knowing if you're spending enough time with God. And how do I know these? Because sometimes I don't spend enough time with God. I mean, the easiest way to figure out what you need to be doing is to figure out what you're doing wrong, right? And so, yeah, that's been my kind of deal over the last few weeks is I have not been spending enough time with God. I have let busyness take over. We all know better than this, right? So let me just tell you the keys real quick. If you're taking notes, write these down, and then I'm going to touch on each of them. The first one is feelings of inadequacy. The second key to knowing if you're not spending enough time with God is feelings of pride. And the third is a never-ending task list. Let's unpack that a little bit. Okay, so first key to knowing if you are not spending enough time with God, if you are feeling inadequate, that is not in line with His Word. That is not in line with His will. If you are feeling inadequate in any way, you are not spending enough time in the Bible. You are not spending enough time with God. Let me tell you why. Because when you spend a lot of time in the Bible, you find verses like, I am fearfully, wonderfully made. You find all kinds of verses about God's purpose for your life, that He knows the plans for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. You know, you find eons and eons and eons of verses about how much He loves you. And there's a lot in there about humility. We'll talk about that with pride. But being humble and being inadequate are not the same thing. And so if you feel like you are not enough for, let me think of some different areas in your life. If you feel like you are not enough of a wife to your husband, for example, you need to dig in the Word and pray about that and write up some affirmations to the contrary. Because, like I've said many, many times, the spoken word is so much more powerful than the thought word, right? So when we have thoughts in our mind, okay, I don't feel like I'm good enough. I'm never good enough for my children. I'm never good enough for my husband. I'm not a good housekeeper. I just can't keep my house clean. I can't keep my finances in order. I don't know enough to speak that truth into that person's life. When you have these things that are swirling around in your brain, those are thoughts, right? And if you take a spoken word and speak over it, it is much more powerful than just thinking, oh, that's silly, Semele. Yes, you do know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Yes, you can say that. Or you are too enough in your mind. That's the same weight. If you speak over it and you say, what God has joined together, he will not separate. Or let me find my affirmations on my marriage. When you say two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. Thank you, God, for blessing my marriage. When you speak that out loud, then you are affirming that God is blessing your marriage, that he is in your life. You are giving the power to him. You are activating his power, and you are no longer trying to operate under your own power. The reason that you feel inadequate is because you are operating under your own power. If you are activating the spiritual world and you are relying on God to walk through everything and to fill in your gaps, then you won't feel inadequate, because you're not inadequate, because God's filling in all of your gaps. So when you start feeling inadequate, it's because you're not trusting him to fill in your gaps. And that's because you're not spending enough time with him. Does that make sense? So like right now is registration. Lots of people are talking about, whether they put their kids in school next year or whether they continue to homeschool. Let's talk about that for just a moment. If you feel inadequate to educate your children, that's because you're not spending enough time with God. Now, I'm not saying that homeschooling is the right answer for every single person or for every single child. It's not. There is no one right answer for every single person or every single child. God made us all unique, right? And that's one of the things that's so cool about him is we don't have to all be the same. Like, that's a gift. We don't have to be the same. I don't have to look like you. I don't have to act like you. I don't have to talk like you, because God did not make me to act like you or look like you or talk like you, right? And so if it's not right for your family, that's one thing. But if you feel inadequate or incapable of doing it, that's another thing. That's your key to wrong thinking, because you feel incapable, not because it's not the right thing for this season or this time or this child, because that totally happens. Like every single year in my family, I kind of evaluate, is what we're doing right for each child, because each child may be in a different season for that time. And is it right for our family right now? So it's okay to do that. It's okay to evaluate that. Those of you who go to public school, it's okay to do that. It's okay to evaluate that. As you look to next year, it's time to start registering for next year. It's time to start picking your classes for next year for your kids who are in high school or in college or whatever. It's okay to evaluate. Is this working? Because that's a skill. That's a skill that we teach our kids. Is this working? Self-reflection is so important. And if it's not, if you feel inadequate, well, then okay, I need to spend some more time in the Bible, right? Number 2, pride. The opposite of feeling inadequate is being prideful. Why are these both keys? Because if you are relying on your own ability, you are prideful. It's the same thing, really. It's 2 different points, but it's the same thing. So if you're walking around and you feel like you don't need anybody or you don't need anyone's help, like, in something at work, or, you could work for somebody that's that way. Or you could have a child that's that way. Yeah. So, I mean, if you are, or you could yourself be that way, that in your pride, a key to knowing that you're acting in pride is that you're trying to have too much control. You're not trusting, again, same thing, not trusting God to fill in the gaps for you, not trusting other people to fill in the gaps for you. This is such a dangerous thing, especially for moms. I have said this. Tell me if you have. If I don't do it, it doesn't get done right. How does that work for us? That does not work for us, right? That is our pride talking. That is us saying, I have to do everything. No, we don't. We actually need to work in cooperation with people. And if you are that mom that does everything for your kid, let me tell you, if your child is tall enough to put their clothes in the washer, they're tall enough to do their laundry. Why are you doing their laundry? Don't. They need to learn how to do that. If your child is tall enough to reach the stove, they're tall enough to make scrambled eggs for the family for breakfast, right? If they're tall enough, or if they're old enough to know not to touch the hot griddle, they're old enough to make pancakes for the family for breakfast, right? If they are tall enough, or if you have a stool that makes them tall enough to reach the microwave, then they are capable of heating up an Easy Mac, right? I mean, we don't need Easy Mac at my house, but you know what I'm saying. They're capable of heating something up, okay? Let's let our kids do the things that they are capable of. If your husband, wives, ladies, if your husband's definition of clean is different from your definition of clean, do not take over. He needs to be responsible for some things in the home. Don't let your pride take over. It's a pride thing. When you take over, it's a pride thing. It's about your pride. And you need to be working in cooperation with your spouse. And that's something that you need to model for your children and model for the people around you. And we learn that by working in cooperation with our God. Do we want him to take everything over? He gives us choice. We need to do the same to the people around us. We need to honor and respect the people around us to make choices that might be a little different than ours. We need to honor and respect our spouses to parent in a way that might be a little different than ours. We need to honor and respect our children's abilities to make some mistakes or do things in a way that might be a little different from ours. And just because it's different from ours, this is a reminder for myself. It's not a mistake. It doesn't make it a mistake. It could just be different. And that's okay. And we can learn from that too. My children teach me a lot more than I teach them, I think. Okay, number 3. Task list is never ending. This is the third key to knowing if you're not spending enough time with God. So we talked about feeling inadequate, and that's because we're not letting God fill in our holes, right? And so that's your first clue that you're not spending enough time with God. If you're acting in pride and you're trying to be too controlling of things, that's your second clue that you're not spending enough time with God. And the third one is, do you have a never-ending task list? Let me tell you why this fits into these 3 things. Have you ever stopped long enough to consider that it is the still small voice that we are listening for, right? God speaks to us so often with a still small voice. And it's really hard to hear that when you're surrounded by noise. And for moms, sometimes that's literal noise, like actual noise. There's constant noise. That's why I'm doing this in a hotel. But another form of noise is an unending task list. It's all of these demands that you constantly have to be doing, And what got me thinking about this is at this conference that I'm at, we heard from a couple of our representatives, Representative Zerwal and Representative Cecil Bell. And it's very interesting to hear what they have to say. And one of the things that they talked about was the legislature this year, or this session, has three main focuses. And I was told also in my conference this weekend that if you talk in threes, you can remember threes. And I can only remember two. So I don't know. Let's just let that sit for a minute. But two of the things that they are working on are Harvey and disaster relief, because we were so affected by Harvey. And then the second is school finance. And as a homeschooler, I would think school finance doesn't really affect me, but it really totally, or you would think that, but it really totally affects me in a lot of ways. Because I pay taxes, it affects me because of school choice. And there's a lot of things out there and a lot of people out there who want to minimize or diminish school choice. And that's a big problem for homeschoolers. We're always one session away from having problems homeschooling. So I listen when they talk about this. I listen real hard. And I believe it was Representative Zerwas who said this. But he said that his goal this year, our state has plenty of money. The comptroller has given them gobs and gobs of money to work with for the budget. We have plenty of money, okay? So he's like, so I am able to fill in some gaps that we had to create last time, like Medicaid and school finance and things like that. When we didn't have enough money, I'm able to now fill in those gaps and do it responsibly. And he said, so when I'm looking at school finance, I've got to think about things like, we had the school shooting in Santa Fe. How do we create an environment that protects our children? And he said something that just made me realize what I've been struggling with in my own home and in my own homeschool over the last few weeks. And what he said was he could provide funding for all the metal detectors in the world, all the police officers in the world. But at the end of the day, and he wants to provide the funding that the school districts say what they need, right? He wants it to be kind of like this school district says they need this, and this school district says they need this, and not to be just a blanket answer to everybody, because there's no one right answer for everybody, right? So he wants to kind of give them the power to choose what is the best way to service their school and keep their school safe. But he said, there have been some proposals that have gone over my desk that involve counselors in the school. He said, we need to provide funding to provide for actual counselors in the school, not counselors that tell you how to get in college. Those are important too, but actual counselors in the school that students have access to. Because at the end of the day, no matter how many metal detectors or police officers we have, it's the mental health of our children that is such a problem, that is causing this problem, that is the end all of this problem. And I talked to one of my friends who has experience with difficult mental health issues in her own children. And I said, yeah. And not only that, but we need to provide space in their day to access those counselors so that they don't suffer consequences from taking time to access that. Somehow we need to provide space in their day for that. And I said, because when we have 10% of college freshmen considering suicide, there's a problem. There's a really big problem. And that problem is not only the college and the pressure the college puts on them. It's actually high school. It's because in high school, we don't teach our kids balance. In high school, we don't teach our kids how to take care of themselves. We don't teach our kids how to, satisfy their mental health. We don't teach our kids how to spend enough time with God, because their task list is never ending. And we do it in the name of teaching them time management, but we don't teach them time management. We teach them to push and push and push and push and push until they break. And they either end up shooting up the school, or they end up killing themselves, or they end up hooked on drugs or whatever. And I'm not saying that's the case in every single time, in every single case, but I mean, really, when you think about it, if we are not teaching our children to slow down and have some whiteboard space in their life, some time to be quiet, how are they supposed to hear the still, small voice of God? And we do it to ourselves too. We, as a society, do it to ourselves. And the answer is to teach our children better than us, right? I don't know any mom out there who doesn't want their children to have better than they had. I know that you feel that way. I know that I feel that way. I want better for my kids. I want them to learn from my mistakes. And one of my mistakes is burning the candle at both ends. One of my mistakes is saying yes to too many things. And I want to teach my children how not to do that. So, tell me what you think. I am eager to hear 3 keys. I'll just recap them again real quick. Number 1, feeling of inadequacy. God did not create you to be inadequate. God created you to be fully capable and fully adequate for the purposes that he put in front of you, including your job. You might have like an administrative job or something like that you think isn't a big deal, but boy, it is a big deal to people who are not administrative minded. You may have, children, you may be a teacher, you may be a police officer, you may, whatever it is that God has placed in front of you, God has created you to be fully capable and adequate. So if you feel inadequate, you need to spend some more time with God. He would not have put you in that position to have you be inadequate in that position. Number 2 is pride. If you are trying to control too many things, if you are relying too much on your own ability, then you are not relying enough on God's ability. And if you are saying, I said it the other day, I'm the fixer. I'm not the fixer. God's the fixer. It is something that I do well, but it's not because of me. It's because of him. And without him, I don't do as good of a job, right? So pride. If you are saying, I am the only one who can do this right. I am the only one who can do this. Yes, the best yes is a great study for that, for sure. If you are feeling like, if I don't do it, nobody else will, or nobody else can. These are things that I say all the time, or they're not going to do it right. That's pride. You're not spending enough time with God. And number 3 is your task list never ending. You've got to find a way to cut it down. You've got to create whiteboard space in your life. You've got to create time to be quiet before God. And in our society these days, quiet is something that we have to work for. It's hard. But you can do it because God will do it for you if you just ask him to. That's all I have for today. Remember, the goal is never perfect, always forgiven. Have a great day.